Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really digging into something major, a conflict that feels like it's fundamentally changed the global picture. We've talked for years about this shadow war, right? Hidden attacks, proxies.
Yeah.
But June 2025, that shadow just vanished.
Mhm.
It became direct, open.
It really did. It's a moment I think many analysts feared, but maybe didn't expect it to be quite so overt. The underlying issues, I mean, they've been bubbling under the surface for decades. That's no secret. But what we're seeing now, this direct military fight between Israel and Iran, that's pretty unprecedented.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack how this really started, what's happening right now, and frankly, why the whole world seems to be watching so closely. We've gathered insights from quite a few comprehensive reports, global affairs analyses, to try and give you the clearest possible picture of how things escalated. And personally, I'm really keen to explore the complexities here with you. It's a lot.
And that's the right approach, because you really do need to understand the long history, the deep-seated tensions, to get why this direct clash became, well, perhaps almost inevitable in some ways. It's a definite shift from that strategic ambiguity we saw for so long to direct military force.
Okay, let's unpack the spark then, the flashpoint. Iran's nuclear program has always been this huge issue, right? Constant headlines, diplomatic rows. But what made June 2025 the moment it all exploded? Reports mentioned this major acceleration in uranium enrichment. Western intelligence was saying Iran was getting to near weapons-grade levels. What does that actually mean, practically speaking? And why did that specific point trigger such a massive Israeli response?
That's really the crux of it. Near weapons grade, it typically means enriching uranium up to about 60% purity. Now, compare that to the, 3.67% needed for civilian nuclear power. It's a huge jump, and it puts them alarmingly close to the 90% needed for weapon. What it really does is slash the breakout time, that's the time needed to actually produce enough fissile material for one bomb. So for Israel, looking at that, it wasn't just another development. It felt existential, a red line, as they termed it, being crossed. The perception was they had to act before Iran potentially got the bomb itself.
An act they did, swiftly. June 13th, Operation Rising Lion. This wasn't small scale. It was a big, coordinated preemptive strike. Israeli jets, drones, reports even mentioned cyber teams involved. They hit, over 100 targets inside Iran, including key nuclear sites, Natanz, Isfahan, facilities near Tehran, and reports also mentioned senior IRGC commanders, that's the Revolutionary Guard, and nuclear scientists were killed in these strikes. What's so striking here, as you said, is how open it was. This wasn't a covert op blamed on someone else. It was Israel taking direct action. How does that shift from the shadow war change the game?
Oh, it changes everything completely. The shadow war operated under this veil of, plausible deniability. It kept things simmering but contained in a way. An overt strike like this, it just rips that veil away. It signals a much more dangerous phase where direct confrontation is the new norm. It sort of sets up this immediate tit-for-tat dynamic. Every action demands a very public, very direct counteraction. It's less strategic chess, more like high-stakes poker, maybe. And Iran's response was immediate. They called it an act of war, and they backed that up quickly.
They certainly did. The retaliation wasn't subtle either. Within, 48 hours? Iran launches this massive missile and drone barrage. That speed, that scale.
Yeah.
It really showed they were ready for this kind of escalation, too.
Absolutely. And the targets were major Israeli population centers. Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba, big cities. Now, Israel's missile defense, Iron Dome for the shorter range stuff, the aero systems for ballistic missiles, they intercepted a lot. They definitely did. But the reports are clear. Quote, several projectiles got through. And the fact that some did penetrate, especially the one that hit the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, injuring dozens, well, it highlights a crucial point. Even the best defenses can be overwhelmed by sheer volume or, increasingly sophisticated attacks. Israel immediately accused Iran of war crimes for hitting the hospital, of course. Iran denied targeting civilians directly.
And then almost instantly, Israel hits back again. Counterstrikes, bombing IRGC bases, but this time in Syria, hitting Hezbollah launch sites down in southern Lebanon, even striking suspected drone factories over in Iraq.
Yeah.
If you connect the dots there, it just paints this picture of a region immediately catching fire. Action, reaction, counter-reaction, incredibly fast. How is this different from earlier flare-ups we've seen?
The directness and the speed are the key differences. Before, you might see a proxy attack, maybe some vague threats, then perhaps a carefully measured Israeli response days or weeks later, often unacknowledged. Here, the cycle is compressed into hours. Direct strike, direct retaliation. It suggests both sides were maybe not expecting it on that specific day, but certainly prepared for this kind of escalation. A willingness to trade blows directly, not just through intermediaries.
And just when you thought it couldn't get more complicated, the U.S. gets directly involved. Reports mentioned deep divisions in Washington about how to respond, the classic intervention versus non-intervention debate. But ultimately, President Trump ordered U.S. airstrikes on 3 major Iranian nuclear sites. And this included Fordo, right, the one that's famously buried deep underground. What does targeting that specific facility signal? What does it take to even hit something like that?
Targeting Fordo is a huge statement. It's built into a mountain specifically to withstand conventional airstrikes. So, using B-2 stealth bombers, which can penetrate advanced air defenses, and deploying specialized bunker buster bombs, well, that's not just about setting the program back. Bunker busters are designed to penetrate deeply buried, hardened targets. The message is unambiguous. The U.S. intended to cripple Iran's enrichment capability there, not just damage it. It showed a U.S. willingness to use overwhelming force directly against Iran's most protected assets. A very kinetic, very decisive move. And there's no question that level of U.S. involvement definitely escalated the war further.
Right. And Iran's response wasn't just aimed at Israel anymore. They started targeting U.S. military bases, specifically in Iraq and around the Persian Gulf, which of course puts everyone on edge. U.S. ships in the Strait of Hormuz went on heightened alert, and we saw global oil prices spike significantly.
Exactly. The Strait of Hormuz is that critical choke point. Something like a fifth of the world's daily oil supply passes through there. So any increased risk, any tension in that narrow waterway, it immediately sends shockwaves through the global energy markets. That's why oil prices jumped. And it raises this really important question, about how these regional conflicts draw in global powers. We saw India, China, the EU calling for an immediate ceasefire, but those calls, well, they seem to have been largely ignored so far. Why do you think that is? What does it say about their leverage here?
That's a really good question. I think it suggests that for Israel and Iran, right now, the core strategic issues, there's a nuclear program for Israel, projecting strength and deterring further attacks for Iran, they just outweigh the international pressure for a pause. Neither side seems to see a diplomatic path right now that meets what they see as their kind of essential security needs. So the calls for a ceasefire, while important, maybe lack the unified teeth or the specific incentives needed to force a halt when both sides feel the stakes are this high, maybe even existential.
That makes sense. And the consequences are huge when major powers get drawn in like this, especially when it touches these vital economic points like Hormuz. It really destabilizes things globally.
So the million-dollar question, I guess, where does this go next? Are we actually looking at a full-blown regional war?
Yeah.
Because the flashpoints are definitely there. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran's most powerful proxy, they're reportedly on high alert. You've got the Houthi rebels down in Yemen, also backed by Iran. Could they start targeting Israel or maybe U.S. allies in the Gulf? And then there's Iraq and Syria, always volatile, potentially becoming battlegrounds again for militias aligned with either side. How do all these proxies complicate things?
Oh, immensely. For Iran, these groups extend its influence and provide a way to exert pressure across the region, sometimes with a degree of deniability, though that's harder now. They create multiple fronts for Israel and its allies. For Israel, hitting these proxies is necessary to degrade Iran's capabilities, but every strike risks widening the conflict, potentially dragging Lebanon or other areas deeper into the fight. It's a dangerous balancing act.
And amidst all this military maneuvering, there's the human cost. Reports of over 100,000 Iranians fleeing Tehran, fearing more Israeli airstrikes. It's easy to forget the civilians caught in the middle of these huge geopolitical clashes.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder that these strategic decisions, these military actions, they have profound, often devastating consequences for ordinary people. Fear, displacement. It's not just lines on a map.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And looking at the current situation, it feels like a standoff. Israel has been pretty clear, signaling more strikes to come, insisting the nuclear threat has not been neutralized. Meanwhile, you hear about daily life in Israel, constant air raid sirens. And in Iran, reports describe this growing nationalist fury.
It really feels like neither side is prepared to back down right now. So what does this mean for the average person living there? Is this intense conflict the new reality? It points towards a really dangerous stalemate. The internal pressures in both countries, political calculations, that rising nationalism fueled by the attacks they make, de-escalation incredibly difficult. Every move seems to demand an equal or greater counter-move. The stakes just keep rising. For the average person, it means living with constant tension, pervasive fear, and a deeply uncertain future. The possibility of a wider war feels very real. It's less a new normal and more like a fundamentally new and much more dangerous situation for the entire region.
Yeah, it really underscores that this isn't just another typical Middle East flare-up. The global significance feels much bigger this time. You've got the obvious terrifying nuclear weapons risk hanging over everything. You have the direct threat to global oil supply chains, which affects everyone's wallet everywhere. You've got the direct or indirect involvement of the major world powers, the U.S., maybe Russia and China watching closely or getting involved peripherally. And all this feeds into the looming possibility of dragging the entire region into war. A war that could look very different from what we've seen before, really shaking up global power dynamics.
Precisely. Understanding this conflict, its roots, its dynamics, its potential consequences, it's not just an academic exercise anymore. It directly impacts global stability, economies, potentially our own lives. Knowledge here is really crucial.
The stakes couldn't be higher, really. The consequences could ripple outwards for years. And just as a final thought to leave you with, consider what happens if there's just one miscalculation, a stray missile, a misinterpreted signal when so many powerful players are operating on such high alert. Or think about how this crisis might permanently redraw the map of alliances in the Middle East, or fundamentally alter the global energy landscape for good. It's definitely a lot to think about and something we all need to keep a very close eye on.